buenas tardes. Yo soy Gerardo Fernández.
Good afternoon. I'm Gerardo Fernández. I work in VirusTotal. Thank you to the INCIBE for the invite to talk about a topic that I'm quite passionate about, toward a new paradigm in event correlation. This paradigm is the new possibility to provide a space for event correlation. I have divided my talk into three phases. First, the classic or current model. Second, what's new in this system. And then a case study with the new possibilities that are coming up precisely due to this limited nature of event correlated. I consider myself old school, if I may say so. I have more than 20 years of experience in IT security. I almost before security was even a thing. And then I've been training further in this topic, and I try to facilitate the work of analysts in security. So the classic model will be a local storage of events and using CM to generate reports. In order to be able to analyze how the new paradigm can change the current situation, I'm presenting a story. There's a story and narrative, and we will see how things change toward new possibilities. So what's the story? Let's assume that we have a network that has been attacked, but not really attacked. It's received an alert because a non-authorized access has been identified. So we're going to take a look at this timeline and see the typical actions that have to be taken in such events. Setting a timeline also allows us to see how the new options that are arising from this change in the paradigm change and shorten reaction times. Let's start with this scenario. There's an alert because a non-authorized access to a piece of equipment has been identified. With the classic model, we will go to that equipment, we will analyze it and investigate different processes, etc., etc., etc. And we don't really obtain a great deal of information on what's happened because it's a superficial analysis, generally through the installed antivirus and different software. This doesn't really provide much information. And so we need an in-depth analysis. And we find that, for example, there's a Word document that has a series of macros which provoke the access to our resource. So, after a while analyzing the equipment, we've come to the conclusion that the alert comes from a Word document. It's ciphered documents. This difficults the analysis, and let's assume that it belongs to a spear phishing campaign. Spear phishing, if you don't know it, uses a sender known by the user with the content known by the user so that no kind of suspicion is raised in the receiver. So the user would open the Word document, even if it's encrypted, they would have the password to open it. And what we can do, we can try to upload this document to, let's say, VirusTotal, since I'm here. And we see that there are 5 antivirus that detect this kind of software, this kind of spear phishing. Only 5. And so, as a consequence, there are not many indicators on this file. However, further down the timeline, there's a report showing that similar Word files belong to a spear phishing campaign. The report also tells us about a domain, an external ID that was being used to attack the local network. So from an external IP, our network has been attacked, right? So the question would be, has any equipment within our network communicated with that IP? The problem with a classic model is that depending on the timing, we may not have stored information on the event anymore. It could be easily the case that we don't have any information available anymore, and so this remains totally hidden to us. So we don't really have the knowledge to know if the threat has been eliminated. We've deleted the suspicious Word files, and the file equipment has been compromised, has been tackled, but we don't really know if the threat has been completely eliminated. All of this has some costs in terms of time. A series of weeks have passed by in this timeline, and we don't really know what the depth of the damage may be. As a consequence, there are a series of problems in this classic model. The search space is reduced. We cannot store all information internally. We can store with fewer nodes, or we can have a lot of nodes in a reduced time window. And so there's another limitation here, the time available for the storage. Inefficient correlation. And the correlation is inefficient because we cannot access all of the information that had been registered. We don't know, which is very often the case, that many CDRs don't report. It's also due to a lack of context. We need to have a context about the stored information. An IP, a domain, can be malign or benign depending on the window it's been opened in. And the information that's registered, that's recorded, needs to have a context in order to be efficient. This would be the classic model. This is an abrupt separation. So what does the new paradigm bring along? An infinite storage. There's no limits as to what I can store. So possibilities rocket. No limits to event registering or registration. Information is normalized, standardized, and even including information from additional equipment, from additional devices, because we have no limits to the storage anymore. So we can include other types of equipment. And standardized information and absence of limits opens up a great deal of new opportunities. What can we store with no limits? Endpoint-generated events, telemetry generated by DNS, NetFlow, proxy, traffic screenshots, I would say complete TCAP files, storage loading, storage dumping, the connections that have taken place, and lastly, metadata on files. Standardization or normalization has been done for quite a while, but normalizing all of the information poses a new challenge. Each event is processed, the content is broken down and indexed. This is a line from Apache with the IP, the request, the response, the date. The idea is to have all of this information standardized with tags that classify the information, and so at a certain point in time I can ask the system, does any origin from any service contain this IP or this URL or this file, this folder? So I can ask questions to have better information with these tags. But this is not only applicable to services, but also to kinds of files opened and or executed. And this allows us to facilitate event correlation. This is an example. We have two services, HTTP and SSH. Both have been standardized or normalized. And now we could ask something like, what IP direction of a web petition has been used as the origin of a different service recently? So with this kind of search, we can see if there have been any remote connections, which is something that's very typical in automatic attacks. We could also classify the search using date. We could narrow down the search by date. We could also pose more complex questions. For example, what files have been downloaded and opened from a specific IP direction, and what connections have been created with that IP. So questions could be more and more complex thanks to the fact that all of the information will be normalized. If we go back to the timeline with the equipment, the alert, the encrypted document, we could see that the time needed for each of these steps is shortened. We could ask, for example, what equipment has connected to the equipment that generated the alert and what files were open at the time in that equipment. And so we would obtain a list of all of the files that were open. After this, we could ask a more complex questions, which would be, what equipment has opened a Word file with the same metadata as this one? And then I would get the answer, what equipment has opened a similar document. And then I could use this information. These examples I mentioned are not fiction. These are real examples that we're using. For example, with Yara. The fact is that we not only shorten times, but also have better visibility. After all of this timeline, we could also launch a consultation, a question to see what equipment owned by us has connected to an external equipment or IP. And after all of this process, we would have complete information. This is a product from Workflow and Chronicle. And here a consultation has been conducted regarding relevant network activity. The criterion used here in this example is prevalence. What equipment or frequency would be the criterion? And in this case, there was a direction, an IP that was used in an attack against the Democrat Party. And so this is only an example of different criteria used for the consultations. I don't have any more time to present all of it. And so what would be the next step? This is an idea that's been, let's say, playing with, which is threat intelligence. I have all of this information, and I could enrich it with intelligence services and threat intelligence. What is threat intelligence? Threat intelligence is information on behavior and dissemination of or spread of the threat. With the following questions: what are the systems targeted? What attack vector is used? What it communicates with? What's the activity performed? And who's the author? Following on the scenario that I was telling you about, if we take a Linux kernel as an example and we make a consultation, we can obtain all the information collected on that attack. Here is a network with different concepts, different pieces of information, the IP, from what country, what file is related to that IP, what's the degree of threat of that file, what URL directions have been in relation with that file. So a great deal of information that allows us to make a general search or more specific search. The idea would be to incorporate this information into our limited information storage system. What's important about this is that the information should be contextualized. It's not only stored anymore, but there is information and tags about that information stored. We have visibility that goes beyond our own infrastructure. We can take a look at what the rest of nodes have been involved in that spear phishing campaign, for example. But on top of all of this, we can also use threat indicators in our search, and we will take a look at this in a bit. Contextualizing information enables more flexibility. If we use the HTTP example with a series of tags, this will be a typical consultation. The first level consultation would allow us to see if the IP belongs to a malware campaign, and then a file that's been downloaded and it's been identified as malicious. But we could go into further detail. We could take a look at the IP, and we could see that it's a malware campaign using nuclear EK, and we could find its relation to ransomware. And we could see that the process generated in our system would be SVCH host. All of this is aggregated, added information. I'm just playing around with new ideas, what we could do in such a consultation. Depending on when the consultation is done, we will obtain different values. And IP domain can be malicious depending on when it's consulted, because some of the equipment is shared, for example. So this will be the temporary context. And then there's a permanent context that gives us parameters. For example, the legitimate or the metadata. And this would open up new search criteria possibilities. We could ask whether we've been affected by Lockit or if we've been affected by nuclear A key. And affected means that they might have tried to attack us. We can ask whether we've been attacked, but we can also ask if they have tried, if an attempt to attack us has been made. And so this would open up the tree with the different nodes, and we will be able to consult the different nodes.
Recordaros que ahora habíamos conseguido reducir el tiempo a base de un par de consultas.
This is with the same scenario. We've shortened the timing, the times, and all of this is included in one consultation. We would look into what equipment had files open with at least 5 antivirus programs reporting it. In this case, it would be a Word file. So we're working with this number of general rules with this method. Additionally, if we take into account that these equipment manage private information or delicate information that's not quite complete yet, the report is still being developed. In this case, we would have access to IPs or domains that seem to belong to a malware company. In that case, we would be able to detect that one piece of equipment has connected to one of those IPs, and we wouldn't have to wait until the final report is created. So then again, we will be shortening the time needed. What would be the conclusions? Well, now we will be able to include many more devices, cell phones, tablets, laptops, depending on the different scenarios. In backstories, they've worked on industrial domains, incorporating information from industrial equipment. Visibility will be the second conclusion, the second main benefit, not only having information on our network, but having extra information. The search possibilities rocket because we're not searching on the basis of what we have stored. The reaction time is reduced given that we have more search possibilities, and then scalability also increases a great deal. This is the ultimate advantage. However, there are many more possibilities to explore. These are the elements that I'm working with, but when you think about the amount of possibilities that can come up in cybersecurity, I'm sure you will find many things that can benefit from this method. Thank you very much.